All right, guys, I'm back. I'm just going to wait for everyone to join again, and if I didn't get to her question, just ask it again. Instagram needs to let me go live for more time. Hey, guys. Thanks for joining me again. I know it's annoying, but Instagram only allows up to an hour live, so I have to roll with that. And feel like, go ahead and ask the questions if I didn't get to one of your questions. Okay, so natural anxiety supplement. So remember, you guys, anxiety is not a sickness or a disease. It is a state of being. And this might be contrary to a lot of people, but what people say, but this is a state of being. It is a hyper stress response. You are stressed the hell out, right? And so your body's very on edge at all times. A lot of times the biggest problem with women who have anxiety is they have low progesterone. Progesterone is that kind of relaxed, chill, I feel really good and cool hormone. And when you don't have enough progesterone, good luck feeling that way. Good luck sleeping, good luck feeling relaxed. So your number one goal is to make sure your progesterone levels are good and you're eating foods that work for your body. If you're getting anxiety after eating, there's a gut issue going on. If that's not working, I really like rhodiola, I actually recommend, if you have anxiety, to just get a Dutch test done, see where your hormones are at, where your anxiety levels, your cortisol, your adrenaline, all that good stuff. Because if you have high cortisol, you're going to need a different supplement than if you have low cortisol. So again, it's like a caveat, like a lot of people just like supplement randomly and end up wasting so much money. But as kind of like I guess GABA is good sometimes. It just really depends on the person. Like GABA is good. Rhodiola can be helpful. Ashwagandha, lemon balm, and holy basil. Those are kind of my 4 go-to adaptogens. And then you can also sometimes use mushrooms. You need to make sure they're coming from a proper source. I like to use Mountain Rose herbs. Or sometimes OM, Organic Mushroom Nutrition, can be okay. But I have kind of gone more towards Mountain Rose herbs and making a tea out of that. So yeah, there's a lot of options. But again, remember, when you have anxiety, you always want to ask yourself why you have anxiety and not just say like, I have anxiety, it's just something I struggle with. I know it's being diagnosed as an illness, but I'm like, dude, it's just a state of being. Your body is stressed the hell out. It's just like a hyper survival state. Hi, Jessica. Does having 12 cysts on each ovary mean PCOS? I'm very confused because that's what the doctor told me today. Doctor, that's funny. So remember that you cannot be diagnosed with PCOS with just an ultrasound. If a doctor does that, they're not doing it properly. There are specific guidelines a doctor must follow. They must test your androgens or see symptoms of high androgens. They must see that you're either anovulatory or you have polycystic ovaries showing up on an ultrasound. But remember that polycystic ovarian syndrome has nothing to do with cysts. And I know you're like, what? Isn't that so confusing? But remember, in the medical literature, cysts refer to follicles. And so poly, meaning many follicle ovarian syndrome. So remember, when you're not ovulating, there is usually 8 to 12 follicles racing each other towards ovulation. One is going to win and drop that egg, right? So one follicle with one egg is going to make it to ovulation, and then that egg sac is going to drop that egg. And until that happens, until ovulation occurs, that cycle, you will have 8 to 12 follicles or cysts show up on an ultrasound. And so all an ultrasound is showing you is that you have not ovulated that cycle. Does that mean you never ovulated? Probably not. Does that mean you have polycystic ovarian syndrome? Maybe, but there are other factors that must be looked at before you get diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome. Then on the flip side, there are ovarian cysts, which are the individual follicles that are actually inflamed on the ovary. They're inflamed, full of pus, infected, and they can burst. 2 very different conditions. The ovarian cysts usually are caused by estrogen dominance or lots of estrogen in the body, which a lot of women with polycystic ovarian syndrome do have. So some women with polycystic ovarian syndrome also do get ovarian cysts, but they're 2 separate issues. Isn't that super freaking confusing? Yeah, I know. So that's why they're trying to change the name of polycystic ovarian syndrome. So until then, a lot of people are gonna just stay really freaking confused. But if your doctor diagnosed you with PCOS just by ultrasound, I would recommend getting a different doctor. Honestly, that's craziness. What's your opinion on kombucha drinks? They're fun to drink, but I would not like chug kombucha. You don't know where that wild fungus yeast was growing, and you don't know what bacteria it was exposed to, what bacteria it's increasing. So, kombucha can be fun to drink, and I treat it just like if I was going to treat an alcoholic beverage. I consume it time to time, but I'm not like, oh, I'm chugging kombucha, like gut health, no. So you got to make sure that you... and a lot of people don't realize is like if you've ever made kombucha yourself, there's like this nasty slimy fungus called the mother that's just like sitting on the top, and you're like literally sitting out your sugary tea in like room temperature to just like allow it to just ferment. You're like, ferment, little birdie, and like all these bacteria and funguses are just like going crazy on this sugar, and you have no idea what it is because they're microscopic. You can't see it with your eyeballs. So people that are like, oh, kombucha is so good for you, or drinking it while they're pregnant, I'm like, you're crazy, dude. Kombucha is not bad for you, but it's not like something I would drink every single day, bottles and bottles. It's just one of those things that's like hyper, like nobody would have drank that stanky tea until like 5 years ago. And then it became like, all the cool people did it and paid $4 a bottle for it. And so like everyone thinks it's good for you, but it's just one of those things that's been like overhyped, overfad. It's not like I avoid it, but I'm not like going out of my way to like, spend like $100 a month on kombucha. Do you think a colonoscopy prep is bad for your gut bacteria? Yeah, I mean, it can be. The drink that they give you, I forget what it's called now, but like it just clears you out. But again, it's like one of those things where you're doing it once, so you should weigh the pros and cons. If you really need to get a colonoscopy, like a lot of people, like they just run in the opposite direction of Western medicine, and like that's not really the answer either. It's more of like you want to make sure medical intervention is necessary. That's the difference. Is it necessary? A lot of people don't realize that their conditions are completely lifestyle and nutrition based, and so medical interventions might not be necessary until you get that figured out. But if you get that figured out and you still don't improve, that would be an application for medical intervention. Or if there's something serious going on that you're not really sure what's going on, it's better to be safe than sorry and get things checked out. So it's like about being responsible. So, if you need a colonoscopy, you need a colonoscopy, and I wouldn't the stress is going to be worse for you than the actual prep. Any HEPA filter recommendations? I use one called Blue Air. That's my HEPA filters. I really enjoy them. They're very good, very easy to work with, order new filters, that kind of thing. But you kind of have to do your own research and decide your budget and everything. The Blue Airs are slightly more expensive. They're a Swedish company. They're really good, but they're also a little bit more expensive. So, it was like an investment for me. It wasn't like something that was like, I just like flippantly bought it. Like I understand it's very expensive. So, but I think that filtering the air, especially where you're constantly at, is important. So, there's tons of HEPA filters on the market. Look at consumer reviews, look at customer reviews, and just kind of make a decision, like do the best you can with what you have kind of thing. I've been doing coffee enemas, but find I can't expel most of it and feel heavy in the gut afterwards. That's probably not a good time to be doing coffee enemas then. If something doesn't work for you, you guys, you have to listen to your body. And I would definitely not do something if the coffee's just being retained and you can't expel it. So there could be intestinal inflammation there. Like remember that your gut lining should be about 1 millimeter thick, and it can inflame to almost 1 inch thick and, leave this much room for food to digest. So you got to make sure that your intestines are not super inflamed. If you're constipated, you cannot do a coffee enema constipated. You got to clear your colon out first because it's a retention enema. So, I don't really recommend playing around with it if that's happening. It might not just work for you at this time. You always wanted to be responsible, you guys, with your health. I expect you guys, I give you information, but I expect you guys to use your common sense. That's your job. It's your responsibility to know your body and learn your body. If you're taking advice on your own body from everybody else but yourself, there's a problem there. You have to learn to tune in and trust yourself and trust your intuition and understand that if something doesn't feel right or is not right, you need to cease, because honoring your body comes above all else, regardless of outside information. Thoughts on CBD oil for anxiety? I tried it and it actually made me more anxious. then it's not for you. I'm like very neutral on CBD. A lot of people are like, act like it's like Jesus reincarnated, and I'm like, meh. So if it works for you, awesome. If it doesn't, awesome. So, use your common sense. If it doesn't work, don't spend your money on it. There's better things that you could be buying. You know what I mean? Can high cortisol equal anxiety? Yes, high cortisol does equal anxiety. That's my point. Like, it is anxiety. High cortisol is anxiety. It's not like equals anxiety, it is anxiety. You know what I mean? Anything to keep in mind with adaptogens for such chronic stress that I'm testing for low cortisol? You'd expressed concern over licorice root extract previously, so now I'm working to be mindful. Yeah, it's like one of those things, you guys, where that's why it's so important to know where you're at. So if your cortisol is low and you were taking licorice root for a long time, you know that you were actually like jumping up that stress response. So, if you have low cortisol and you know your diurnal pattern, meaning like how high it is when you wake up, morning, afternoon, night, then you can take licorice root depending on when you're low throughout the day. But I'm very careful with something like that. When it comes to adaptogenic herbs, it's a lot easier than licorice root on the body. They're a lot more like adaptogenic, meaning they help your body adapt to stress regardless of what the stress is. But on the flip side, like, you do have to be careful with herbs. A lot of people act like because like something's like a natural base, like it's an herb or it's an essential oil, it must be, so much safer. I can just go crazy with it. And this is not the case. Like, herbs are so powerful, and so are like essential oils. So we need to be very careful and very mindful. And whenever you tie in a new supplement, you just do one at a time. You slowly and gradually build up to make sure your body has time to respond to something. So then you could like continue to you want to continue to titrate up rather than just like throw a bunch of supplements at your body and have no idea what's causing a problem. How to detoxify the liver to reduce estrogen. I just did a story on it on Monday. It's labeled liver under my stories. I have a liver detox guide on my website. I have so many resources for you guys. It's not even funny for liver detoxification. Herbal versus medical antibiotics for gut healing, SIBO, Candida parasites. For me, like medical, I'm just real with you guys. Like, I'm not against Western medicine at all. It can be a really helpful tool in certain applications. It's just depending on the application. If you've like overused antibiotics your whole life, you're probably not going to see a lot of benefit from like more antibiotics. If you've just constantly taken antibiotics, like popping them like candy for a cold and a flu and whatever it is, like you're just popping them, then you probably shouldn't do a lot of antibiotics unless it's like very like medically necessary. But then on the flip side, if you're someone that's been healing for years on herbal antibiotics and then it's not really working and you're resistant to Western antibiotics, why? Try them. So like I have like it really depends on the person. Everyone is so different. Unfortunately, Xifaxan is what's used for SIBO most of the time, and it stays local in the small intestine for the most part. And I've had multiple clients go on it, and most of them don't see the results they want. It helps while they're on it, and then afterwards they just kind of go back to before, and the herbals end up being more beneficial long term. But that doesn't always mean that it doesn't work for everyone. Some people take one round of Xifaxan and they're like, I'm healed. And I'm like, that was worth it, right? So it just kind of depends. When it comes to like antiparasitics, it just kind of depends on the parasite. And then like Candida, I am like a huge fan of conventional antifungals like diflucan and nystatin if you can get your doctor to prescribe them, especially if you have a lot of yeast. But on the flip side, a lot of times I just like recommend kicking off your protocol with the Western antibiotics or antifungals and then continuing with herbals. I think the mesh of both can be more beneficial than just using one or the other. But for some people, they just need one or the other, or they refuse to go on antibiotics or vice versa. And so it's just really dependent on the situation. But I think both have a really helpful application. But I think there's a point where like if the Western or like conventional antibiotics are not working for you, you do have to admit it and then move on to something else, and vice versa. While in the beginning stages of healing, are anxiety attacks to be expected? As I've started work, I feel like I've never felt so out of control. Yeah, so what people don't really realize, you guys, is when you're in a really diseased state or an inflamed state or a stressed out state, a lot of people think that when you change your diet, you should immediately feel better. And to me, that's a symptom suppressing diet, right? If you immediately feel better once you change your diet, you're probably symptom suppressing, because if you're coming from a place of imbalance, changing your diet might be rough. Because if you're actually lowering cortisol, remember that one of cortisol's benefits is that it is released during stress, right, to break down the tissues, but it also has other roles, including being a potent anti-inflammatory. And so what people don't realize is when you actually start to cool the stress response, it is a good thing. But you're cooling cortisol, which was providing you pain-killing, anti-inflammatory effects. And so sometimes you can end up seeing your digestion get really wacky when you first change your diet. You can see your pain, like your joint pain, get a little worse at first. Like you're like, whoa, like I'm not feeling as good as I've been feeling. You can kind of feel low energy. We call it a healing reaction. Like you're detoxing almost, but I hate that word. It's just so overly simplified. Like your cells are starting to run properly for maybe the first time in a long time. And so they're starting to process things more efficiently, and you're feeling the effects of that. But obviously, if it's getting worse and worse, like you always want to ask yourself, are my symptoms truly getting better, or are they gradually getting worse? If they are gradually getting worse, there's a problem. If they are slightly gradually getting better, but still improving, that's good. That's super good. But a lot of people, the biggest mistake that they make, and this is not a good mistake, is when they change their diet, they are unintentionally calorie restricting. So they don't realize that once they change their diet, they are eating less than they were before, and it can really stress your body out. So make sure you're eating the same amount that you were eating before. And you are eating balanced protein, carb, and fat. I cannot emphasize that enough. Making sure you're getting plenty of salt from Himalayan pink salt or Celtic sea salt. And plenty of sleep. Like panic attacks are not super normal. Regardless of the person, it could be a B vitamin deficiency. It could just be that you're overly stressed for like an emotional reason, or it could be like a serious food thing, like you're not eating enough or you're not getting the proper nutrients, specifically B vitamins. B1 is specifically helpful for anxiety attacks. But I hope that makes sense. Would high T4 indicate low T3? Probably. Probably. It probably means it's a conversion issue, but you'd have to check T3 to be sure. I just got on, so my DHEA was very high, testosterone high, and ferritin high. Okay, so DHEA is high. Remember, DHEA turns into estradiol or estrogen and testosterone. So if your DHEA is high, usually one of those are high. So, that makes sense. And that's usually a stress issue. Seriously, remember you guys, DHEA is protective of the tissues. When stress hormones are high, our body must save us, right? Or all of our tissues would be broken down. And so what does it do? It secretes the only thing protective, which is DHEA and testosterone. So when DHEA is high, I always look for inflammation, always look for high stress, cortisol, low thyroid, adrenaline, prolactin. You want to make sure that when you see something high, you need to look at your stress response. Usually you see a high stress response, or you see inflammation coming from the gut, or both. Usually there's both. So there's a reason why they're high, but it's not the thing that's causing your symptoms. It's a reflection of your symptoms. High testosterone can eventually cause symptoms, but it's like one of those things where what came first, the chicken or the egg? Most likely that did not come first. So it's really important to check the stress response, really important to check the thyroid. Like honestly, you guys, like I know I always talk about stress, I always talk about progesterone, and I always talk about the thyroid, because like those are the most important things to test. Like if somebody comes to me and says, I have low estrogen, I don't care. I need to know more. Like, there's a reason why you have low estrogen, but that does not tell me anything, like, at all. So you really do need to find the proper test. Testing your hormones, just your individual hormones, is usually not enough to tell you jack squat. So you need to be testing the most important metabolic markers, T3, progesterone, and your stress hormones, like cortisol and adrenaline and prolactin and that kind of thing. And then you would also test your sex hormones like DHEA, testosterone, estrogen, and sometimes even pregnenolone can be helpful. And that will tell you the whole story. But if you don't get the whole story, which I know it's hard, some doctors these days are, it's like pulling teeth, man. But if you don't get the whole story, how do you know how to go about your healing journey? Like where did that stress come from? And until you know, you don't really know what to do about it. I hope that makes sense. Is that PCOS? Possibly. I still need an ultrasound still, though. If you know that you're not ovulating, usually it's polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I want you guys to understand something simple. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is literally hormonal imbalance that have gone unchecked too long. You know what I mean? Like, PCOS is just a severe metabolic condition. Your metabolism is so destabilized, it has gotten to a specific point where you're being diagnosed with a syndrome. But PCOS starts years before you actually get diagnosed. Years. Because it's a metabolic syndrome. Picture one wrench being thrown in a wheel. The wheel continues to spin, but it's like, and then it gets more and more off kilter until it just starts falling apart and like exploding everywhere. And that's like diabetes or cancer. You know what I mean? It's like, it takes a long time to get to that point. It doesn't just happen all of a sudden like, oh, I just got diagnosed. Like, oh, surprise. Like, your body has probably been talking to you for a very long time. I'm hungry. I'm tired. I don't need any more caffeine. I need salt. I need sugar. I need carbs. And you're like, no, 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 no. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to choose this, and I'm going to abuse you. And eventually your body cannot compensate any longer. So, when we get diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, who cares? We've got to actually ask ourselves why we have it in the first place. And I know that sounds insensitive, but I've been there. And I understand that wallowing in an illness or a diagnosis leaves you with nothing. It makes you a victim. And there is a reason why it happened in the first place. And that's where your answer is going to lie. That's where your action and your active action steps lie. Your action steps don't lie in, I have PCOS, what do I do now? The action steps lie in, why did I get to this point? How did I get to this point? How can I start removing the stressors that have stressed my metabolism so harshly that it's affecting my reproduction? I hope that makes sense, and I hope it doesn't sound insensitive. You guys know I love you guys, but I also need to give you tough love because I see so many people just wallowing in their PCOS on Instagram, just wallowing. Like, they're just like, I have PCOS, and like, this is what I'm struggling with on a daily basis, and I understand it's a struggle. I understand that, but if we focus all of our energy on what we cannot control, where is the energy going to be left into what you can control? Like your nutrition, your sleep, how you talk to yourself, how you manage your stress, how you invest in your relationship, how you do things you enjoy. There's going to be no energy left for those things if you're constantly just wallowing in the fact that you got diagnosed with the syndrome. And that is just the plain facts. How to raise stomach acid and what causes it to be low. There's a million things that cause it to be low, but it's usually stress and too many polyunsaturated fats. Polyunsaturated fats just put a wet, damp cloth over the digestive enzymes. So I always recommend ditch the nuts if you're doing a ton of nuts. If you're doing any industrial seed oils like canola, soybean, sunflower, safflower, any kind of seed oil, just get it out of your diet. Start with saturated fats, and then make sure you're taking some digestive bitters. You could do apple cider vinegar, ginger, lemon. All of those are fire enhancers or digestive fire enhancers. What could large blood clots during my period mean? They are around the size of a 50-cent piece or larger. The doctor I saw just said to get on birth control to fix it. My tubes are tied, by the way. So when your tubes are tied, a lot of times it does lead to excess estrogen. I see it pretty regularly with tubal litigation. A lot of times tubal litigation can cause your periods to be heavier. And what you have to understand about clots, you guys, is clots are just a sign that your body is bleeding faster than your anticoagulants can keep up with. So if your body is clotting and your body can't even keep up with the fact that it's trying to anticoagulate or anti-clot those clots, but you're bleeding so fast that your body actually cannot do it fast enough. So that's a sign that you're bleeding heavy. Whenever you are doing your clotting larger than a quarter, it is a sign for concern, and it bothers me that a doctor is not helping you out there. That's not safe. And so I recommend getting your progesterone levels checked mid-luteal phase, because that's usually the biggest thing. So you need to make sure your estrogen detoxification is on point, because when you have tubal litigation, it's a responsibility, you guys. Like I always say, when you tie your tubes, you are impairing a normal reproductive process, and you're still allowed to, you're still ovulating for the most part. You need to make sure you are, and you need to make sure that your progesterone levels are enough to balance out estrogen. And then you want to make sure estrogen's getting out of the body as quickly as possible. For usually heavy bleeds are due to estrogen, because remember, estrogen thickens that uterine lining. and progesterone thins it. So like 9 times out of 10, a heavy bleed is due to estrogen. And so for whatever reason, tubal ligation, I have a theory. I can't find any research to back it up, but I think that tubal ligation does irritate the body in some way, affects detoxification in some way. There's something going on that affects, that causes estrogen to be high. It just, like, almost every single woman that comes to me with tubal ligation is having really heavy, clotty, crampy periods. I don't think I can recall one woman who has worked with me with tubal ligation that didn't have that issue. So it is a common thing that occurs, and I think that progesterone levels should be kind of stayed on top of, as well as making sure your liver is really working pretty well. Can low ferritin cause thinning hair? It can. Low iron, but a lot of times people make the mistake of just starting to supplement iron, which is like not a good idea. So if you feel like it could be low ferritin, making sure you're digesting foods well, getting grass-fed beef liver or other grass-fed beef organs in can be helpful in raising ferritin. But then also, like, we have these like weird, obscure things that we test in Western medicine, even though it's called functional medicine, like vitamin D and iron and things, and it's like, I'm very much a believer in the wisdom of the body. Like, your body doesn't just like lower those things like just because it forgets one day. Like, oops, like oopsie. Your body is a tightly regulated system. I mean, you guys, if your blood pH moved by 0.1, you would die. Your blood would boil. You would die. You know what I mean? So your body is like super wise. It's not like some like flippant being like, oh, it's fine. Low ferritin, it's fine. Cool. I am a firm believer that certain things are low or high for a reason. Your body is compensating for a purpose. And instead of focusing on one particular thing, again, I always say, what's the right question, you guys? It's not how do I get my ferritin levels up? It's why are they low in the first place? And so if you're under stress, if you are not digesting your food very well or breaking down the minerals in your food very well, if you're not eating the proper nutrients for your body, your gut's super irritated and inflamed. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Of course your ferritin's low, or your vitamin D's low, or this is low, or that is low. Of course it is. Like, of course, and that's not the issue. It's more like asking yourself, why is it low in the first place? And thinning hair is usually due to low metabolic function. So high stress hormones, low T3, lack of nutrients, lack of blood flow to the scalp in general. Remember, blood flow equals nutrients. And if your blood is not flowing all the way to the scalp, or there's not enough blood flow, nutrients nutrients won't get there. Another thing is, like, your hair follicles are very energy intensive. And so a lot of women don't realize they're under eating. They've gone like literally 20 years under eating. Like my, mid 30s clients and my perimenopausal clients, some of them have yo-yo dieted since they were 20 years old. They've literally never eaten enough calories in their life. And of course their hair is falling out. Their body is not going to prioritize growing hair over keeping your heart cells functioning, so you have to look things in perspective. And if your hair is thinning, it's probably a bigger issue than just one nutrient. I know we like to Google, like, why is my hair thinning? And it's like, you need iron, you need B12, you need B vitamins, like, you need zinc, you need selenium. And I'm like, you need a hell of a lot more than that. So sometimes it's one individual nutrients, but that's like a magical unicorn that happens 1 in 20 cases. It's usually a bigger metabolic issue because hair is a very aesthetic thing. We don't need it for survival. Our body obviously likes to grow it. It keeps heat on the head, but if it can't sacrifice the nutrients, then it won't. Jessica, I'm so glad I came across your page. I have taken my condition into my hands, all thanks to you. You are helping so many women out there. Thank you. I appreciate it. And honestly, you guys, I just teach you what I wish I would have known when I first got diagnosed. Like, I talk to you like I would have wanted to be spoken to. There's a lot of people on Instagram that just blow smoke out of their booties and just talk about crap. Like, I just feel like they're not helpful at all, or they confuse you even more, or tell you need to buy this and buy this and buy this and buy this. And I'm like, stop, let's just be real for a second, sit down, have a conversation like friends would, and get to know your body a little better. That's the first step. Can you speak a bit to what to expect with a coffee enema? I feel like I could benefit, but I am a bit scared. Yeah. So you guys, I have a story that walks you through the whole process if you're like, you like a little TMI. It's really not like, a lot of people picture like an enema, like having like poop involved like everywhere. There's like poop on the walls and poop, like they think that there's so much poop, like they're just afraid. And I'm like, you guys, like there should be like literally barely any poop involved. It's you taking an enema bucket, making a coffee solution, filling your colon to a comfortable place with that coffee solution, retaining it for a little while. You completely remove the tube and everything. And remember, the tube's like half the size of your pinky. It's not like something huge. It's not scary and intimidating. The first time's going to be a little weird. Like it's a new experience. So make sure it's, there's some coconut oil on there and just relax. And you're going to be like, wow, like this is nothing. Why did I psych myself out? Like the thoughts before a coffee enema are usually a million times worse than actually doing one. And then, you're going to retain the coffee solution for as long as you possibly can, 5 to 15 minutes. Usually the first time is going to be very quick. And then you're going to poop it out like you normally poop. It's not scary. So it is a little intimidating. I try to walk you through the process as much as possible, but I also just acknowledge that at some point you're just going to have to do it and decide if it's for you or not. It's not like something that's 100% necessary. It's a very helpful tool, but not everyone tolerates them well or likes doing them or is comfortable doing them, and that's okay. You don't want something to cause you more stress than it benefits you. So I always recommend trying something once. If you hate it, you never have to do it again. You know what I mean? So I would start really, really conservative with a low amount of volume, maybe 2 cups or so, less coffee than normal, and just give yourself about an hour and just do it. And if you're going to realize it's so much easier than what you've built up in your head. You mentioned castor oil packs often. Do you have any resources for that on your site? Now, sure, I totally understand the process. Yeah, there's a lot of resources online for how to do a castor oil pack. My goal is to make a guide. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I sent out a newsletter a couple months ago on how to do a castor oil pack, so maybe I'll just make a guide really quick on that. But yeah, there's tons of information on how to do one. It's very simple. You saturate a piece of wool in castor oil, you lay it over your gallbladder and your liver, you wrap yourself in plastic wrap to just keep it on. That castor oil is very sticky and messy. So if you are, you don't want to spill it everywhere. That's why the plastic wrap. And then you want to just put some heat on it. Hot water bottle, heating pad, that kind of thing. Sit there for 15, 20 minutes. You should feel your gallbladder kind of gurgle. And then you might poop something really, really greenish yellow the next day. And that shows you that your gallbladder really squeezed. I really like to actually do a gallbladder massage after a castor oil pack. So I'll do a castor oil pack for 30 to 45 minutes. And then I'll lay on my stomach with a tennis ball and kind of jam it up underneath my ribs. I'll show you. Let me get on my knees. So, underneath your ribs is where your gallbladder is, and you want to put pressure on the gallbladder and the liver to get it to kind of drain. And remember, castor oil dilates the ducts in the gallbladder and the liver, so it allows more flow. And sometimes people have a lot of buildup or stones in their gallbladder, and so when you dilate the gallbladder after you castor oil has sat on your skin for 30 to 45 minutes, you can actually push and massage some stones out of your liver and gallbladder, and then you'll poop them out the next day and you'll see them, they'll float. Sometimes they're a bright green, sometimes they're a darker color. It just kind of depends on what they are. Some of them are bile buildup, and then some of them are actually gallstones. They're different things. So overall, just fun, disgusting process, but it's not that hard. It's just taking a piece of wool. There are some that are sold specifically for castor oil packs, but you don't have to buy special wool. Just make sure it's a piece of wool, and then soak it in castor oil. And I personally use the same wool for 6 months to a year and then buy a new one. But some people say it draws so many toxins out of the skin that you need to dispose of the wool. And I'm whatever floats your boat. Obviously, if you see some brown crap coming out on your castor oil pack, you should probably throw it away. But if it's pretty clean, replacing it every once in a while is probably fine. Why does Danny Roddy encourage the use of aspirin? Aspirin is a salicylic acid, and salicylic acid, or I should say acetylsalicylic acid, is anti-inflammatory. It blocks prostaglandins. And part of the reason, and Danny Roddy encourages it, not because Danny Roddy encourages it, but because Ray Peat has talked about the beneficial uses of aspirin. Aspirin has been used in like cancer prevention, cancer treatment protocols, and like 100 years ago and then up. And then eventually when Advil and Aleve and Tylenol came on the market, they pushed aspirin out. They kind of demonized aspirin, but it has a lot of beneficial effects on the liver. It's very, very helpful for helping the liver. It's also slightly antifungal, so it's helpful for the gut. I personally take aspirin every day, but I don't like actively recommend it to people in my practice or online because I just don't want people to be irresponsible about it. But I have always struggled with inflammation, and so for me, like, I've tried a lot of things, and aspirin is actually more powerful than most anything I've ever tried. Ginger, turmeric, that kind of thing. So, whenever it comes to your body, you're allowed to do whatever you want and experiment. Just don't be irresponsible. But at the same time, it's like, if you're to a point where, the conventional approach hasn't worked for you, what's the harm in taking some aspirin for a couple of weeks to see how it makes you feel? For me, it provides more mental clarity. I just feel more alert. I feel more in my own skin. Like, I don't know, I just feel better. When I miss it for a couple of days, I totally notice. But the only thing is aspirin can increase your needs for vitamin K. So if you do aspirin, it's always recommended that you take enough vitamin K to balance out those effects. Because aspirin really thins the blood, and vitamin K is necessary for clotting the blood. Thoughts on caveman regime for skin acne? I've never heard of the caveman regime. I'm assuming he meant regimen. I said regime. I personally, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just a brand, but I think the simpler your skincare, the better. I do, my good friend Sarah from Healthy Skin Glows, she has created a wonderful program that teaches you how to use natural skincare. And I really just love her approach because it's very holistic. She's a molecular biologist. She, I haven't been doing what she said for the past week. I've been really lazy with my skincare, and look, zit, zit, zit. And I pop them like she would tell me, she would cringe at that. She's the master. Check out Healthy Skin Glows, but her program is totally worth it. Especially if you struggle with acne or melasma or anything like that. She's just so helpful and teaches you how to create a healthy skin regimen that is as natural as possible and doesn't damage the skin barrier. How many milligrams of spirulina do you recommend per week to be beneficial? I'm only taking it a few times a week. That's fine. I'm not a huge, I don't push powders like that. They can be helpful for iodine and they can be very detoxifying. But again, sometimes, especially Americans, they're it's the American way, something's good for you, the more, the better, and people are putting pounds of spirulina in their smoothie, and I'm stop, so a couple times a week is perfectly fine. Started a parasite bacteria and my inner ear sinuses feel full and pop when I swallow. Could it be biofilms, and how to get rid of it? For biofilms, I always say check out Dave Asprey's sinus rinse you just Google it, Dave Asprey sinus rinse. And it has xylitol, grapeseed extract, I want to say iodine, and he teaches you how to suck it into your sinuses. And even though we disagree on some things, a lot of things, that sinus rinse is actually pretty killer. And then colloidal silver spray. Nasal spray, you spray it up into your nostrils, is actually very helpful as well. It takes time though. It takes time to clear your sinuses. You can also maybe try some drops of essential oregano oil in a pot and put a towel over your head and sniff that in and maybe see if that helps. I have high cortisol, increased weight in belly area, deal with low blood sugar and anxiety. Thoughts to solve? Thank you. Yeah, so high cortisol will cause low blood sugar, and it will also cause the increased weight in belly and also cause the anxiety. So there's your problem, high cortisol. So how do you lower cortisol? You cool the stress response, girl. Make sure you're eating every 2 hours. Make sure you're eating salt in that meal, saturated fat, protein, and sugar or carbohydrate in every single meal every 2 hours. Set your timer on your phone. Every 2 hours you eat nonstop. It's going to feel like a full-time job, but that is the only way you can cool the stress response and heal your adrenals and your liver. Because remember, your liver plays a role in the stress response. If your liver is constantly empty, your blood sugar will tank, right? And then your body has to raise cortisol to break down the tissues to make glucose. And guess where those tissues get sent to? The liver. The liver goes through a process called gluconeogenesis and turns the tissues into blood glucose. So you need to make sure that there is a steady supply of nutrients to the body so that the body does not have to raise stress hormones to make fuel. You're consuming fuel. That is my main tip for anybody that's struggling with stress issues, thyroid issues, any issues really. Eat, and eat regularly, consistently. You need to make your body feel safe. The minute you do that, I mean, I've done that with girls and they're like, I'm so afraid to eat more. I don't want to gain weight. And I'm just like, do it. Please just do it. And they're like, 3 weeks later, they're like, oh my gosh, I lost 10 pounds. And I'm like, I told you. So it's so important to make your body feel safe so it doesn't feel like it has to hold on to fuel and slow the metabolism, because that's what's really happening when you're gaining lots of weight. Your body is storing fuel in the fat cells for later and inefficiently burning fuel now because it feels like it's not going to get food in. There's going to be a famine, that kind of thing. So you really want to make sure that your body feels safe enough to burn fuel more efficiently and doesn't feel like it has to save as much for later. Because remember, 3 things get stored in the fat cells. Well, there's more, but the main things are glucose, free fatty acids, and toxins, like chemicals that are damaging to the metabolism or the body, and the body needs to store them somewhere safe, and that's where they go. The fat cells themselves expand to 10 times their size, but your belly fat cells can expand up to 15 times their size, and your belly fat cells are way more sensitive to cortisol. And your body will store fat in the presence of cortisol because cortisol is a fight or flight or a survival state. Your body feels like it needs to be very safe and store up fuel for the future. So get that stress response low, get your body fueled, help your body to stop making its own fuel and give your body the fuel it needs, and you'll see that improve pretty quickly. It doesn't take that long to feel better. How to take HCl properly for low stomach acid before a meal, with a meal, after meal. Yeah, so I don't recommend taking it 10 minutes before a meal. You want to take it kind of right before that first bite. And you want to make sure your hydrochloric acid has pepsin in it. Is it possible to get off thyroid pills? Yeah, it is. You just have to really do your work. You got to get that liver high functioning and converting T4 into T3. And probably you're going to have to talk to your doctor about it, but a lot of times it takes time. You want to get it to the point where you feel like you're almost taking too much thyroid medication and you're having to actually slowly wean yourself down rather than going off of it when you still need it. So a lot of people get put on thyroid medication when they don't really need it because they're, their T4 is fine. It's not their T4 that's the problem. It's their conversion of T4 to T3, and their stress response is so high that their TSH was high. So it's do you really need it? That's the first question that needs to be asked. If you really need it, then continue to take it all the while supporting everything else to the point where you might not need it in the future and you can start weaning yourself off. But everyone's a little different, and you want to make sure you talk to your doctor about that and they're on board with that. It is possible, usually. How can I ovulate and still be PCOS? You can still ovulate, but a lot of times, remember your ultrasound has to be done at the right time. So a lot of people got their ultrasound done in their follicular phase, but if you got it done, when you ovulated or after ovulation, that would be a different story. You can still have PCOS and ovulate. It's a lot of times you're anovulatory when you first get diagnosed, or you had polycystic ovaries show up on an ultrasound because you got tested at the wrong time in your cycle, or you were having irregular cycles. If you got your ultrasound when you were having irregular cycles, you probably were not ovulating at the time, or you didn't ovulate before you got that ultrasound. So I hope that makes sense, but you can still get diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome if you have high androgens, if you got, polycystic ovaries showed up on that test. So, you can absolutely still have polycystic ovaries or PCOS and ovulate. A lot of women, when they get diagnosed, they weren't ovulating and they didn't realize it. But as you start to learn more about your body, you're like, wait, I ovulate now. And how do you know that you weren't ovulating or you were ovulating when you got those tests done? Unless you are aware of what day you were in your cycle, all the information. But if you actually think about it, sometimes hindsight is 20/20, and you didn't realize then what you know now. So you might be ovulating now because you changed your habits, but you may have not been ovulating then, or you may not have ovulated before when you got that ultrasound. I hope that makes sense. Lost my period. I'm considering taking progesterone. Could taking progesterone worsen acne? Remember, you guys, progesterone kind of allows mobilization of estrogen from the tissues. It's very important to get your liver functioning before you take progesterone, because once progesterone starts getting that estrogen out of the tissues, then your body has to detoxify it. And if you can't detoxify it, it just makes estrogen dominant symptoms worse, like sore breasts, heavy periods, cloudy periods, PMS, mood swings, headaches, acne, you name it. So you really want to make sure that if estrogen's being pulled from your tissues, which is a good thing, right? You need to be detoxing it. And that's why I always recommend really making sure your liver is working well before you just supplement with progesterone. But then again, there's this vicious cycle where some people have low progesterone and it's impairing their ability to detoxify. So sometimes you're impaired and then you implement progesterone and it's actually making you detoxify more efficiently. So it's very dependent on the person. But if it's making your acne worse, your liver could need some love. Do you recommend 0 grams of polyunsaturated fats per day? I consume 6 grams a day occasionally. I recommend stop obsessing about your food. You don't want to eat concentrated source of polyunsaturated fats like industrial seed oils, but some people take things to such extremes. I'm like, if you want some freaking nuts, have some freaking nuts. Like, what the heck? But a lot of people eat things because an outside source told them to eat them. They're not craving nuts. Their bodies are craving something and they're like, I don't know what to eat to a snack, so like so-and-so told me to eat nuts, so I'm gonna eat nuts. And that's not an empowered decision around food. That's stupid. So if your body's craving something like that, great. But then also ask yourself, like, I have a lot of women that are like, I just crave nuts all the time. And I'm like, do you eat salted nuts? And they're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, you're craving salt. You're not craving nuts. So, if you're just craving nuts, eat some freaking nuts. But nobody really likes raw almonds, in my opinion. Maybe you do. I don't know. But I think they're disgusting. So it's like one of those things where if you want nuts, eat nuts. Stop obsessing about polyunsaturated fats, but remove the main sources of polyunsaturated fats from your diet, like industrial seed oils, canola oil, soybean oil, rapeseed oil, sunflower oil, blah, 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 blah. Stop eating like tons and tons of nut butters. Like if you want to do 2 tablespoons a day, that's fine. But don't like every time you're hungry, like eat nut butters. It's just about balance, and it's really about really tuning into your body. And a lot of people don't realize how much they don't crave a food until they cut it out. Like for me, it's not very difficult for me to not eat nuts because I think they're gross. But some people really enjoy them. So then eat them. Sometimes I occasionally will crave like some pecans and I'll eat some freaking pecans. It's just, but I follow my body's cravings, and most of the time my body craves easy to digest and absorb and delicious metabolically enhancing foods. And so I do that instead. Like if my body craves greens, I eat greens, but do I force greens down my throat? No. Absolutely not. There's no common sense to that, and you've completely just, completely removed your own intuition regarding food. You have innate biological signals to tell you what your body's needs, and so many of us have just overridden it so completely that we don't even know how to listen to our bodies anymore. We don't even have a clue. And so where you start is you just kind of start and then ask yourself, like, do I really want this, or am I eating this to eat it, or am I eating this because somebody told me to eat it, or am I restricting this because someone told me to? You've got to really eliminate outside sources and you do you. Trust your gut in choosing food. Cloudy, smelly urine, no pain after eating, lots of greens, normal, kidney issues. Usually cloudy urine is adrenaline, like epinephrine, like just high stress hormones. But I could be wrong. But a lot of times when my clients are experiencing a really cloudy urine, it's obviously a good idea to get checked. Like if you have like urinary tract infection symptoms, it's probably not adrenaline, it's probably like a UTI. But if it's like constant, they've done a UTI test, there's nothing coming back, then it's probably has something to do with like stress hormones, B vitamins. A lot of times when you're eating enough salt and eating frequently enough, that goes away. What and when should hormones be tested for a good clue on hormonal imbalances, say PCOS? I always just recommend mid-luteal phase, but you need to understand your hormonal cycles. So, I have a post a while back. I'll repost it probably tonight. About how your hormones spike throughout your cycle. So you need to understand that. A lot of doctors and people just say, they get tested at whatever time in the cycle and then something's high or something's low, and they don't take into account where you were in your cycle. And you need to know when you're ovulating before you get any hormone test done. If you don't know when you're ovulating, it is a worthless test. You're wasting your money. So you need to make sure you know when you're ovulating and get tested 5 to 7 days afterwards. If you're not ovulating, then I would just test around days 19 to 21 and go from there. Are fibroadenomas concerning? Do they indicate hormonal imbalance? Anything that is like fibroids or uterine growths or anything like that, I always assume there's some kind of estrogen involved, but you obviously need to test to know. If they're benign, if the doctors checked them out and said there's nothing to worry about, then you don't want to actively obsess or stress about it. But at the same time, there's a reason why that's occurring, and you should probably explore why that's occurring, because, growths or anything like that are not normal. So there's usually, like I always say, symptoms start to pop up years before disease. So your body speaks to you in signs and symptoms, and it keeps telling you hey, I'm just letting you know this is what's up. Hey, just letting you know this is what's up. Hey, and a lot of times we just say, whatever. We're drink more coffee, sleep less, stress more, say yes to everything. And our body's clearly saying the very opposite. And that is our own fault. We need to learn to clue into our bodies. If there's something going on, we don't say oh, my doctor told me it's fine. We say, my gut's telling me something's off. I don't feel myself. There's growths going on. There's probably something off. And it would be responsible to explore it further. Obviously, you don't want to make something out of nothing. There's a fine line there. There are people that are serious hypochondriacs and they just need to chill. But on the other side, you do want to ask yourself, why is this happening? The question, you guys, whenever you're experiencing symptoms is always why. Why is this happening? And that is where your answer usually lies. I'm having beef liver for dinner. Woo woo! I get my girls eating organ meats and they're like, oh my God, I'm eating liver. And then they're like, oh, this is actually kind of good. It's fine. And I'm like, yeah, it's not that bad. Does PCOS affect concentration? What can we do about it? Yes, so your focus does matter. Blood sugar can absolutely cause your focus to kind of go back and forth. So, just try to balance your blood sugar. That's the biggest thing for concentration and focus. A lot of women don't eat enough. They'll really restrict the first part of their day. And then by 2 or 3 o'clock, they don't realize they're running on 300 calories. Of course you can't concentrate. Your brain's not functioning. Duh. So make sure you're eating well. From the minute you wake up, you're getting sunshine, you're getting movement, you're treating your body well, and that afternoon slump will be a slump no more, so it's you got to make sure that, a lot of people are I'm so tired by 3 p.m. I'm so fatigued, and I'm what are you eating before then? And they're oh, nothing, I just drank a cup of coffee. And I'm great, that's why, so common sense, you guys. Eat well, get enough sunshine, move well, be in a good environment, and, sleep well. I'm there's 5 things. Sleep well. And then if things are still not improving seriously, then that's a time to really dig a little deeper as to what could be causing those issues. Lack of concentration can be thyroid. It can be blood sugar imbalances. It can be stress hormones. It can be gut issues. There's a million things it could be. But you got to make sure the basics are down before you start going down all the crazy paths. How long does it take to heal adrenal PCOS, elevated adrenal hormones, and high progesterone and estrogen? Well, in your case, I mean, this is different for everyone, you guys. How long it takes is what's going on. How long has it taken you to get here? Has it taken you 15 years? Then it's probably going to take some time. A lot of women don't see things clearly. They don't realize that it wasn't just a sudden diagnosis. Your body's probably been speaking to you for 5-10 years. You know, a lot of women get put on birth control in the very beginning for hormonal symptoms, not realizing that birth control makes the problem a million times worse. And so, you know, you did not only just like take a problem that was already a problem and slap a Band-Aid on it, you made it worse while being on birth control. And so when you get off birth control, that's really the beginning of your healing journey. And if nothing was done at that time, then things probably continued to get worse and worse and worse to end up to where you are today. And so like, you just have to see things clearly, look at your health history. A lot of women struggle from the very beginning of their life, whether it was like medications for whatever reason, circumstantial. There's no, it's not bad necessarily. It just is what it is. But there has to be a lot of work done to reverse issues. But with adrenal issues, and the fact that your hormones are high shows that your liver's not clearing hormones well. Your gut's probably not detoxifying them well either. So, you know, there might be constipation there. There might be gut issues there. There's probably some liver inefficiency. If you're fasting a lot, if you're not eating carbohydrates enough. The biggest thing with adrenal issues is you have to be consuming enough carbs, like 150 minimum. If, you know, and then if you're active, way more. So it's like a lot of women just don't even realize they've been under eating their whole life since they were 15 years old. So like, again, it's just like you have to kind of take where you're at, what's maybe happened in the past that needs to be recovered from. And it can take years. I mean, like, I hate to break it to you guys. Like I give you real talk. Like anyone that's offering you a quick fix you should run so far in the opposite direction. It's not even funny. These are not quick fixes. I mean, I've been at this for 8 years or so, and I'm, you know, compared to who I was 8 years ago, I'm a completely different human being. My cells are completely different. I feel like a different person. But to say that I'm like completely healed of all issues would be not necessarily true. I pretty much don't struggle with symptoms on a daily basis. Like I pretty much live a normal life, but there are days where it hits me. Sometimes I'll have a bad period and I'll be like, what did I do this month? Well, I was super stressed out. I overdid it on the caffeine. I didn't eat enough. You know, like I have to be real with myself. Sometimes it's not just PCOS. It's just life in general. We're not treating our bodies well. And we can blame it all we want on PCOS, but it's not PCOS. It's just us not being responsible. And so, you know, there's a difference. So, you know, when it comes to healing your issues, you want to focus on, okay, what symptoms do I struggle with on a daily basis? What is this telling me? What does my body need the most right now for me to prioritize? Choose 1 or 2 things, work on them, master them, and then move on to the next thing. But usually with adrenal PCOS, it's very simple. You need to make sure you are eating enough, period. That is the first step. If you're under eating carbs, under eating at all, and not eating frequently, there's a stress problem. Almost always. And there's going to be a liver problem as well, because remember, the liver needs to be full of glycogen at all times. And if you're under stress, you're burning through glycogen quicker than you can fill your liver up. And so in that case, you're probably not converting a lot of T4 to T3 and struggling with reproductive, you know, if you're having reproductive symptoms, then it could be, you want to look at your T3 levels as well. So overall, it's hard to give you a time frame, but if you have high elevated hormones, you got to make sure your liver is detoxifying well, which usually it's not. About the castor oil, when is the best time to do it? I've heard castor oil packs for fertility reasons too, follicular phase or the luteal phase best for it. I recommend doing it any time except for while you're bleeding on your period or the beginning of your follicular phase. A lot of people call it the menstrual phase, and like there's no such thing. It's just the beginning of your menstrual cycle. Your bleed kicks off your follicular phase. So, you know, I would make sure you're not bleeding. A lot of people say it can make you cramp harder and heavier, even though I've seen like clinical guides from like the 20s that people like doctors prescribed castor oil packs for menstrual cramps. But I am just careful on the safe side and tell people to not do it while they're on their period, just because a lot of people say it's contraindicated. It's also not safe to do while you're pregnant. So if you may be pregnant or you're trying to get pregnant, not safe. So like a lot of people, if they're actively trying to get pregnant, then after they ovulate, they stop doing castor oil packs. If you're not actively trying to get pregnant and there's no possibility that you're pregnant, then you can do them. It's best to do them during the follicular phase and the luteal phase. So it just kind of depends on your goals, but if you're trying to get pregnant, then it's like, you know, it's one of those things. How much aspirin do you recommend? I don't recommend aspirin. I just don't recommend it just for, you know, personal reasons, legal reasons. If you want to experiment with aspirin, you have to do your own research and decide that for yourself. My platelets are low. Nobody seems concerned, although my dermatologist doesn't want to give me meds for fungus because of the low platelets. Anything I can do? I would just focus on general health. Deep breathing is huge for platelets. You want to make sure there's enough oxygenation in the blood. But it can also, like, sometimes can be a freak thing. So when you get platelets like that, you just want to get retested in about 6 weeks to see. Any suggestions for how to improve cervical mucus for trying to conceive? Eat really well, eat enough fats, make sure you're eating an abundance of food. Nobody wants to get pregnant when there is a deficit. So make sure there is a surplus of those juicy, hormone healthy, like saturated fats. Make sure you're getting enough carbohydrates, that kind of thing. Okay, sorry, Instagram's cutting me off. I have 55 seconds, so I'm trying to get through. Insulin resistance if A1C is 5.4 and fasting glucose is 5.6. I'd have to know more. I don't know. I don't diagnose with insulin resistance. If you were diagnosed, then you might have it. But yeah, I'm not sure. You'd have to like see how your blood glucose is clearing 2 hours after a meal and kind of decide then. What if I crave pizza? I love pizza. Yeah, because you need probably cheese and you probably need carbs. So you can make your own healthy pizza. But you always ask yourself, if you're craving something, what am I craving in that food that my body needs? So I'm sorry, but Instagram's cutting me off. It's been our 2 hours. But I always go live on Friday mornings, so join me then. I love you guys. Thanks for your time.